Welcome back to another episode of the Pursuit of Progress podcast. Today is going to be a very special episode because I'm actually sitting down with somebody that I've known for a very long time. His name is Chris Palasz, and I first met actually about maybe 10 or 12 years ago in Aspen. We were both living up there. And it's just been really, really cool watching him and his journey evolve over the last, decade or so. Chris is now actually the founder of Peak State, where he works with high-performing professionals who on the surface have built successful lives, but deep down, they know something feels off. So his work isn't about just adding more productivity hacks or chasing external success. Instead, it's all about helping people reconnect with who they truly are, build what he calls internal authority, and create a life that actually feels as fulfilling on the inside as it looks on the outside. So today, we're going to be going into a lot of stuff, diving into relationships, identity, purpose, personal growth, overcoming the expectations that can quietly shape our lives, and just what it really means to become the author of your own story. So with that, Chris, great to have you on another episode of the Pursuit of Progress podcast. What's up, man?
Hey, Adam. What a wonderful introduction. Hey, I should get that on writing just so I can explain it as well as you have. It's lovely to be here, and we're great to see you again and connect with you again. So really happy to be here.
Really appreciate your time. I know that you got a lot going on, but I think to start off, for people hearing your name for the very first time, I'd love just to start with a little bit of your story. If we rewind maybe 10 or 15 years ago, maybe even, right about the time when we first connected or maybe shortly thereafter, who were you back then? What happened that just ultimately led you to create your coaching program, Peak State?
Yeah, I had always been fond of what we call, I guess, personal development. I remember even going back to school, my favorite books to read were not, math books or science books, but books that actually taught you what you could do with yourself to enhance your abilities, your just natural, superpowers. But then I got into corporate law, and the reason I got into corporate law is because I come from a family of lawyers, and I thought, it was the way to go. And I went great. I was very good at it. But after a few years of that, you start questioning, whether it's really the path you want to take, whether it was a decision that was heartfelt or more influenced and validated by others. And I pondered about that a lot since I was very little. I always thought, what do I want to do with my life? And I think that question was the one that led me to where I am today. I remember being in an office with a colleague of mine, and she started crying. She started crying about her eyes out. And I was like, what's wrong? She's like, I really don't want to be here. I hate law. It's so unfair. It's so unjust. I mean, whether you win or lose, someone loses. And then, I told her, hey, I get it. I don't know. I totally get where you're coming from. I feel a similar way. And then all of a sudden she stopped crying. She's like, you do? And I said, yeah. She's like, but you never appear like like you're having a bad day or a bad time. I'm like, well, you get through it. And she's like, yeah, but you're not living. She's using the word alignment. You're living in line with what you truly feel. And I remember that hit me huge. And that was definitely a breakthrough moment for me, because her words and that state being so susceptible and crying, and I don't know what it was. It just landed with me, and I was like, interesting. Maybe I do have to pursue something else or pursue this thing that's been kind of calling me out, and see if that's something that I want to work at.
Did you have a coach yourself back then, or regarding just coaching specifically, how did you kind of learn about that? Was it something that you had done yourself and saw the proof from how it affected yourself, or how did you get into that?
Yes. I mean, the terminology coaching can be so many things. For me, I relate it to mentorship, and all along my life, I always had great mentors. I always sought out great mentors. Why? Because I was the eldest of four, and I needed someone to look up to. I had people looking up to me, but I was like, who do I look up to? And of course, there's your parents, but eventually that gets boring, and I had my grandfather, who was a great reference in my family who had been a politician and, you know, and actually a happy man. But I mean, happy is like he had a happy family, you know, happy wife, happy kids, and he was very happy in his job. Like he loved the law. You know? He loved defending people. He loved working hard for them for what was fair. And that to me was like the fine balance and the true joy of having both personal and professional happiness. You know, it comes all together, round circle. So he was one of my mentors. You know, I always, every time I was about to make an important decision, I would go to him. And I was like, well, I've been thinking this. What do you think about that? And then all along my life, you know, my dad for sure was a good mentor, my uncle, and then just my soccer coaches. I had some really good mentors there. But once I got into my profession, I wasn't sure where I really do. I started with this. Is this it? You know, am I really going to dedicate myself to fighting for what's just, you know, in the corporate world as a lawyer, or do I want to take a different direction? And that's scary, you know, even though it was, you know, just before 30. You start, I think, you start valuing people's experience, and you see that as okay. If it was possible for someone else to do it, then you know I can do it. And then you start. For me, it was I have to understand how these guys did the transition at that stage of their life where, you know, perhaps they have a girlfriend or they have a family and they're going to change different variables that are going to impact the way they live, you know, with a career and everything kind of solidified and yes, a level of security and certainty in your life. And so I started reading about these stories. And then I came across this gentleman, which now he's incredibly popular. His name was Anthony Robbins, or, you know, famously known as Tony Robbins now. And he started speaking about how the quality of your life was determined, you know, in a big way by your ability to navigate uncertainty, problems. And that really caught my attention. And so as soon as I finished this book, you know, the giant within, and I went to some of the seminars, got a coach from his company, got certified for him, you know, by his academy as a coach. And then just, I never took my, my foot off the pedal after that. Just started growing in that sense. So to your response, or to your question, which is a little bit long-winded, maybe it's, yeah, since then, since, you know, I would say 2009, I've had a coach, and then I still do.
Wow. So going on 15 years. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'd like to just kind of follow up questions to some of that. So, because that is kind of maybe me a little bit personal here, but I mean, I've found myself, especially in the last couple of years, just really struggling with like finding my purpose. You know, just I think now more than ever with all of this stuff on social media, it's such a comparison culture where everybody has their highlight reel on social media, and you see everybody traveling the world, buying stuff, having a perfect family. You know, you can take it in a million different directions. But because of all of that, I just wonder if, you know, in the past, before social media, people had kind of this over the hill, they hit 40 and they had kind of this midlife crisis. And I just feel like now it's not 40, it's even people that are at 20, 25, people that are just consumed by social media and these highlight reels of everybody that they're following, which obviously is not real and normal and reality. But because of that, it's just really, I think, skewed so many of us, myself included, just with our perception of what's important, how to really just enjoy life. I think for me, I'm just having a contentment with like the now versus always being so focused on like working towards something in the future. Do you notice that with just your clients, the maybe just like the demographics of who you're typically working with? Are they mostly still, you know, men and women our age that are in their 40s, you know, kind of that midlife type chapter, or are you working with people that are younger? Do you feel like that's coaching is even more important now, maybe even at an earlier age because of some of that stuff?
That's a great observation, Adam. Short answer, yes, I agree with that. I believe people are skewed, people are distracted, people are influenced a lot more to a lot more channels, a lot more of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So if before you only had TV and your parents and your coach and your soccer coach or whatever to kind of influence and educate you and, set you on the right path. Now you look anywhere and you have a ton of information. So, say the currency now is attention, right? We're seeking attention from everyone to either to try to impose our philosophy or product or services or that. And it's hard. So I agree. It's hard. It's hard for a 40-year-old. It's hard for a 20-year-old, maybe even harder for a 20-year-old who doesn't have any clarity or direction. So I believe it's super important to have a coach or have a therapist or have a mentor, have someone, a guide. I refer to that person as a guide, and that's someone who's had these internal battles and experiencing inner conflict between this is what I feel I want, but this is what I think I should want because everyone says so, or everything around me points to this. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where most people deviate into a path that they get to their 40s or 50s. And then they look back and they're questioning, what did I just do with, the last 30 years of my life? And I don't think that's a breaking point or something to feel sad about, but it is something to respond to because, if you respond to that at that time, because the alert goes off, you still have some time to kind of go back to, okay, I worked hard. I experienced a lot of the things that I thought I wanted. Now I have them. And what is this new chapter of my life going to look like? How do I want to alter this? How do I stand, in this decade, 40s, 50s to really bring, to really align with what I want and live that truth, and that's what I call my internal authority. Me calling the shots, me really connecting with my truth, me having the space to really align. Alignment's so important. Release the expectations, release the external validation, releasing that identity that doesn't define you anymore. It's probably defined a lot of you up to this point, but now you're getting to a stage of your life where it no longer serves, not on the same level. And I think once you release some of those things, you begin aligning yourself to a more fulfilling and meaningful life.
Is that something that you work with a lot of your clients on, or am I kind of going down a tangent here? But I'm just speaking for myself again. It sounds so easy, but it's so hard to kind of take yourself out of that and just really take a step back and just kind of analyze where you're at in life. I don't know. I get going down these rabbit holes sometimes with that kind of stuff. And I just didn't know if you had maybe an example or like a tangible way that maybe you work with some of your clients on that, or just like how people can maybe better understand what their purpose is, or just understand some ways to figure it out. Like I still at 43 years old, I still have a hard time just understanding what my purpose is. And I don't know. That's a very tough thing to get your head around sometimes.
It is. I think it is. It's complex sometimes. Mm-hmm. Yet, if you mentioned the present before, and I'll give you an example. I had one client who externally very successful. She was working in a family business along with her husband. So financially they were set, 4 kids. They were fine. Their grandchildren were probably fine as well. Mm-hmm. Yet in her role as a mother, she was happy. In her role as a partner, significant other, she was happy. But in her role as a individual, she was unhappy. So like, wait, what, where's the mismatch here? And the incongruence was that she wasn't living as she saw herself in this area, which is, what do I want to do with my life? I'm a mother, I'm a partner, spouse, but what is me? How am I giving? How am I contributing? And I think behind those questions, there's a lot of purpose. That's where the purpose starts knocking. How is it that I can contribute? How is it that a lot of people like the word legacy, leave my legacy? Any of those things point you to purpose. There's a reason that you want to take on those things. We got into that discussion and she was very clear in her responses, you know? And she was like, I've always wanted to contribute to people's lives. I'm like, okay, great. How do you envision doing that? She's like, well, I want to do it for my country. She lives in a European country. And I said, okay, well, how do you envision doing that? She's like, well, I want to be a leader for women's rights. And I was like, great. So what's stopping you from doing that? She's like, I have a 9 to 6 job, huge successful business, demands a lot of my time. I have 4 kids. I have a spouse. And I said, so what's limiting you from doing that? And the key word here, Adam, is a decision. Decision. Once you make a decision, you can change things. Decision to change, maybe how you structure your day. Maybe, you're still going to be a spouse. You're still going to be a mother. You're still going to be a friend. But your role as a human being at what you want to have as your mission or feel called to do as your mission can still be a role that you can pursue. Man or woman. This happens to both. I'm just using her as an example. And so she had some contacts. She had done some volunteer work for the United Nations, and she ended up running or applying for a candidacy to run for president for her country.
Wow.
She was driven. And unfortunately, she came so close to getting the number of signatures that she needed to apply for candidacy. She was just a few thousand short because it's very, I'm not sure if you ever been down that route of having to recollect the amount of signatures from citizens in your country or anything like that. Like, it's like when you run for class president, there's a certain amount of votes that you need from class to say, yeah, I accept that he will represent us. Same thing, but for your country. And it was huge. It was huge. Of course,
all because of just having the allowing herself to make that decision instead of just living in that state of uncertainty. That's awesome.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. Getting over the fact that, yeah.
So with your coaching, do you have a specific area that you focus on mostly? I know that another big one, we talked offline before recording today about relationships and just how that's such a big aspect to, I think, where a lot of people have challenges or just areas that they want to improve and work on. That's probably one of the biggest ones for me, something that I'm not very good at. I need to get better with. So when it comes to relationships, especially now more than ever, when, divorce rate is over 50% in the United States. I'm curious. I don't know if I even actually shared this at the beginning, guys, when I introed Chris, but he actually splits his time between Aspen and also Buenos Aires, Argentina. So he's actually down in Argentina right now. Is the divorce rate as high in Argentina, or is there any thing about, South American countries that maybe is a little bit different than the US when it comes to that?
Interestingly enough, I'm not certain about the statistics, so I don't want to speak on something I don't know over here, Adam. I know in the States it's pretty high.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's pretty common here, and it's getting more common nowadays. But I'm not sure about the statistics. What I can say though is that relationships are difficult, no matter what stage you're in. Whether you're married, not married, living together. And so what I always tell my clients and most of my clients, when they come with me with a problem, the relationship eventually becomes a part of the conversation, because the relationship out of all of our areas of life is the one that has the most potential to impact, how we feel on a daily basis, right? Think when you go to work, if you're in a happy relationship, you're passionate, you're juiced, you're happy in being in that relationship, you're psyched, right? It helps you to uplift you naturally. It's like a natural motivation, right? Even though it shouldn't be, but we kind of use it as it is, and it's natural. But when you're in a relationship that's, dim and it's kind of boring and it's kind of, it's gone on for a while, and you just don't know how to get that spark back, or you're just used to it, kind of dull. That's the word I'm thinking of. It's gotten dull. Maybe your demeanor might not be as, energizing. I don't say a word. And think of a relationship that's down the drain, and you're still with that person, but you're miserable, and all you do is fight. and criticize, right? And get to work or you get anywhere else, and how are you going to be? I mean, that leads to either, you're going to cheat on that person or you're going to just be miserable everywhere because your state is going to impact your state. So that just kind of to exemplify how relationships impact us. But yes, I do believe the divorce rate or, people splitting up is getting higher in the world. And the reason is a lot of people, I think, have not taken the time to understand themselves first. If you're bringing someone else into your life, it's hard to invite them in and show them who you are if you yourself are not sure who you are yet. And so the first relationship we work on with any of my clients, if they want to work on a relationship, is a relationship with themselves. What's happening within you? I had one client who he, kind of going back to your industry, Adam. His house burnt down during one of the fires in California a couple of years ago. And he's taken about another 2 years to find a contractor. In the meanwhile, they're living with his parents. And so his wife, his daughter, and him are living with his parents. And his wife's going mental. She's like, if you don't get me out of here, right? If you don't get me out of here, I'm going to be like, it's either me or I'm tossing you out. So, it's like, and he was having trouble having this conversation, bringing like, I'm comfortable here. Like, this is good. Like, it's a big house, it's close to work, all the benefits. Like, and I'm like, well, what's going on that you can't have this conversation with your wife who you've been together with for a decade? That's not something between them. That's something that's going on in him. His communication, his certain abilities that he has not developed yet, or the confidence that he has to bring up something, or what's the fear behind that, right? So there's all these elements and intricacies that you have to get into in order to understand what someone's thinking about and the conflicts it's bringing them to not be able to do something that sounds simple, yet it's so much more complex. And so I'm not sure this is only in the realm of coaching, but, just to kind of toot my own horn here without humbly, is I've done a strategic intervention. And what that means is you're able to identify what the people, which needs they're trying to meet through their actions. And we have certain needs, like the need for certainty, security, the need for variety, right? The need to feel important, and the need for love and connection. Say those four for now. And sometimes in order to not lose my mom's love, I'm not going to say something to my wife so my mom will keep loving me. And that's the way that's my relationship with her. I've always been loved that way. So I will stay silent in this relationship. So I make sure once I leave this relationship into my own nest, then I'll go back to whatever pattern, I'm repeating. So I'm satisfying certain needs unconsciously. Well, once you identify that and you help them identify that, they're very quick to, okay, I get it. How do I replace the vehicle to satisfy this need in a way that's effective in the situation that I'm in now? Because I'm 40, I'm not 12 anymore. I decided to marry this woman. I owe her the respect and the courage to communicate clearly so we can make decisions together.
It's funny how, as an adult, I still think about the people I'm trying to get validation from more than anybody is still my parents, even at 40 something years old, that hasn't changed even as an adult. And I'm imagining a lot of people are like that.
I mean, it's difficult. It's difficult, especially again, if you don't know that you're behaving a certain way. And like it said, so what we say is it's hard to read the label inside the bottle. You have to have some eyes on you and understand, okay, what's going on? How come you're still behaving this way? You say you want this. It's like you want to see the sunset, but you're running east. So what's going on? Why the incongruence? And basically it comes down to using the wrong vehicles to satisfy the needs, internal conflict, or your beliefs.
That's deep.
Yeah.
And I think there's no
deep work.
there's no final there's no finish line with some of that stuff. It's something that I think people deal with their entire life. There's always more clarity to get, more, deeper understanding of who you are as a person. And man, it's crazy. So with relationships,
it is deep.
I was gonna say, so with relationships, outside of a coach like yourself, which I think is a huge, huge advantage for people that are really trying to, improve this aspect of their life. Do you think that relationship specific coaches are also worthwhile, and that should also be something that maybe is done even early on when the relationship is in a good, healthy state, just to kind of help with getting away from the dullness that can happen over, kind of getting into just that routine and, just where nothing new is ever happening and it just becomes a little bit mundane?
100%, 100%, Adam. I think that's one of the biggest tricks. People nowadays are realizing that they're connecting with their humble side and understanding that they don't have to have all the answers and everything figured out. And it's good to have a wise pair of eyes. So what I mean by wise is someone who's had the experience, or at least, gone down the path, that can say, hey, look at this, point things out proactively. And I think it's very wise for the couple to make that decision early on and say, hey, we've been together for 5 years now. What do you think about this? Having a pair of eyes on us and see if we're still treating each other the same, we're caring for each other the same. If we let go of some of the things that we did before at the start of the relationship. The other one is if we admire each other the same, because there are things that now you admired before, but now you've gotten used to, that they're just part of a routine, and you're not seeing that anymore. So now the criticism comes in, right? It's relationships are great. I think they're great. You must work on the relationship you have with yourself to make sure that you're courageous enough, and that means vulnerable enough, to be able to expose yourself to your partner and have those hard conversations. That makes a ton of a difference in a relationship. And I say so from experience, because in my second relationship, it's a lot different than my first,
Yeah. With my most recent relationship, I think that's one of the biggest regrets that I have, is that I wasn't more intentional about that at the time when it mattered. And now it's too late. It's something that I think maybe you only learn through experience and through mistakes, but man, that I could not agree with you more on that. I think with just kind of back to coaching, just with how much different the world is today, with how, like, you and I we're talking, not halfway across the world, but pretty dang close right now. There's so much more accessibility to coaching than there was in the previous generation. Our parents' generation was the baby boomers, where they just, they didn't really show emotion. They didn't communicate very well. That's a joke that my dad often has with me, with how he, says that myself, I'm kind of a bad communicator with relationships, because he was, and just how different that generation was with not expressing themselves, not doing a lot of the things that you're talking about. And man, just nowadays with how much more ability we have just to, like right now, just being able to talk to you about some of this stuff. And I just say all that just to let the audience know that, man, if you've never considered coaching, if you've never really thought that that was something that you needed, or you just thought it was maybe too expensive or too difficult because you don't have the time in the day to go drive and meet a coach or a therapist or whoever it may be somewhere. And there's so many more options these days to make it happen. So I just hope anybody that's maybe this is resonating with them, that, they at least consider a little bit more seriously, because there are a lot of options out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just a little bit more on relationships, with your, if you get this, if this is too personal, don't worry about it. But you got into when you first started going to Tony Robbins, and that was like what, about a decade ago or more? That was.
Yeah. 2015.
Okay. So were you still married at that point? Were you still in your first relationship?
I was. Yes.
So were some of these things we're talking about, was that also true to you, as far as you just started kind of realizing some of the stuff that we're talking about, and maybe at that point realized that it couldn't really work? You tried to do some of the stuff, but then realized that, because what I'm trying to, long-winded way of me just getting at, sometimes relationships don't work out, and that's okay. But I think, man, to at least have the ability to know that you gave it your best shot, and I think that's where I have a little bit of regret with my most recent relationship, is that I didn't do that. And just, curious if you learned if some of that is maybe from Tony Robbins or just some of the coaching that you had first started to do just to kind of get more introspective on your life.
Any event that you attend to that where you're talking about, relationships about yourself and relationship with others is going to lead to some type of introspection, especially about the relationship that you're in or you choose to be in that moment. To your point, or to your question, I should say, definitely it brought some thoughts and it surfaced some fears, some specific fears that I had felt and had and that I need to pay attention to. So I remember after the first event going back home and eventually in the first couple of weeks, bringing up this with my ex and mentioning it and saying, hey, there are some things that surfaced for me. Can we touch base on them? Can we talk about them? And she said, sure. Yeah. She was very welcome to us conversing about them. Yet when I presented them, she went radio silent. So I think this is important to signal because a lot of people feel they have to carry all the responsibility in the relationship and they have to be proactive and try to find a solution. But the famous saying, it takes two to tango is true. And so you can only, again, be responsible for this part. And that's where the relationship with you is so important. So you being courageous, vulnerable of saying, look, this is happening within me. I don't want to hide it anymore. I have some doubts. Some fears are coming up. I want to talk about them because I don't want to keep going down this path because it's not a happy ending. If you do that and from the other side, you get persistence, okay, that's not your responsibility to change a person to want to join you in that path. You can only represent your arguments or your thoughts, your ideas, your true emotion, and, support. And give, like you said, give it your best shot. And there's nothing to feel bad about if you did that. How much time is a question I get sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting that like, how much time should I dedicate and put into that? If you're giving it all, if you're like, I brought up the truth, I've stated how I feel, I've responded to how they responded to me, or maybe it was a reaction and I've been able to control myself because sometimes you get the bad reaction too. And you've been able to communicate through that and maybe suggest some ideas if you guys can't communicate together and go to, couples therapy or dating or coaching. I say, give it 6 months where you're giving it your all, where you're like, I want to make this happen. If that's your desire, because if that's not what you are truly aligned with and want, then you won't be able to. If that's one situation. The situation where, the relationship gets mundane or, it needs some spark or you guys just need to reconnect. If there's love there, you will be able to, because there's been love and you guys have a way to communicate. If there's not true love there and what your heart's saying, I really need to get out of it, then that should be communicated clearly and as quickly as possible. And the reason for that, Adam, is time. You don't want to spend more time in a relationship that you shouldn't be in. And sometimes the other person knows that as too, but they don't have the courage to say that. So we stay in something that we know is not good for us, but it fulfills a certain need, certainty, security.
Man, that's hitting home. That's hitting home for me right now. Yeah. 100% agree with all of that. Man. Well, just kind of one last thing we'll just chat about before closing out this episode. I want to talk again a little bit more about coaching, and I just really want that to be a focus for so many people that aren't doing any form of coaching, and just how important that is. Somebody like yourself that has your purpose in life now is helping others through coaching and just helping them on their paths. But you yourself, do you have a coach? And the reason I'm asking that is I think it's so important for everybody to realize that there's levels to this. Even coaches have coaches. And I think once you understand that it's okay to have, I think there's still a stigma for a lot of people where they I understand maybe like a gym trainer, that type of a coach, it's pretty obvious that, they maybe need that. It's a physical type thing. But for some of these more introspective, emotional, psychological types things, people maybe sometimes see that as not a negative, but like, oh, I don't need that. I'm okay. They have more resistance to some types of coaching more than others. And just maybe share a little bit about just how it's impacted your life with, you shared a little bit of that at the beginning with, going and getting into Tony Robbins and stuff, but just how important this can be and how transformational. It sounds like you've had a lot of people that you've helped that have really, turned the corner and gained clarity and all that kind of good stuff.
Yes, this practice is pretty significant because it impacts all the areas of your life, whether you know it or whether you realize it or not. I think, we've labeled it coaching, but for me, it's much more. It's, how there's software development. This is human development. So there are areas in the human that you must develop. And those three things are mind, language, which is the way you communicate both internally and externally, and how you feel. And that's your heart, your spirituality. Those three sections must be aligned, must be congruent. And I think that's what coaching, mentorship, events, human development has done for me and does for me still. I lived in that philosophy of it's not so much in I have to constantly grow, is now I must constantly make sure that what I'm choosing is aligned with what I think, with what I'm saying. So I'm removing the inner conflict and with what I feel. Because that way I make sure that my life's not only successful, but fulfilled. I come in full circle. And I can't tell you how many clients I've had that feel that way, that no achievement is big enough for them to feel fulfilled. And I'm like, you're chasing the wrong thing. This you can't chase. You must feel, you must create within. And so we many times focus on the wrong things. Like we major on minor things instead of paying attention to what's truly important and what makes a difference in our lives.
I love just the words that you use with internal authority. I think that's such a very clear and just effective way of kind of saying what we're talking about today. Just giving yourself permission to be who you are truly. That, I don't know, just maybe close us out today with just explaining that just a little bit more, because I think that was one of the nuggets from the beginning that I've been kept kind of thinking back to, just how just those two words have a lot of meaning to them. And just maybe for the audience, again, that wants to get a little bit deeper into this and maybe even work with you in the future, just understanding their internal authority.
Yes. Like we started saying through some of our conversation already, I believe a lot of people have sight of what they want and then they lose sight because of all the influence and all the distraction and all the noise. And internal authority is coming back to what's truly important to you and having those elements guide your decisions. Because if you're congruent on how you feel, if you're doing what you feel you love and doesn't have to be as romantic as this is my mission in life, although it can be, there's nothing wrong with that. But there's a purpose for me to be in this work, because I know that through my work, I get to impact that communication to skiers that come with their families to this resort and have a marvelous time. And I'm good at communicating that to them. There's purpose behind that. There's a reason. I'm good at that. Why would I do something else? Great. If with my spouse, I create meaningful moments of connection once a week. And because I know my role is important here, there's purpose in that. And I'm clear on that, which means I've reclaimed my internal authority. I act from that stance. I take that position. And I'm clear on that. But that's all internal alignment. That's your internal authority, making decisions from what you know is true to you. Not your friend who's getting a divorce and it's cool now because it's happening. Not because your parents got, a divorce and you have to maybe do the same thing because it's normal. Or not because you have to go create the next startup because that's the thing now and you're a failure if you don't. Not because you have to drop out of Stanford and pressure yourself to be successful. I mean, no, it's what do you want? Why do you want it? Is it aligned with your values or is this, shiny object? And okay, how do you start acting with conviction in order to create that? Not achieve, create it. And here you have to find balance between accomplishment while fulfilling.
Very well said. I think it's just my last comment on that before we close out. It doesn't have to be something massive either. Like you can have purpose, you can make an impact on others, you can build up this authority within you, even by very small, minute little things that you do for others. It doesn't have to be this massive thing. It could be asking a stranger how they're doing today. It could be anything, that just, I get so caught up personally with these big things, like, oh, I need to have a big company or I need to have a lake house and a house in Hawaii and all these external things.
Right.
When in reality, I mean, you can make so much impact on others just by simple things. It doesn't have to be this massive undertaking. There's ways to do this today for everybody. Just really, really cool stuff, man. Thank you so much for just sharing all of that with us. I really, really liked our conversation today.
As did I, Adam. I loved it. And just to one more note on what you just said, to give your spectators a tool here. I think one good question that I ask myself in order to make that impact is, what's one thing that I could do today to contribute to blank's life? And so whether it's my kids, my partner, myself, a friend, and what's one thing I could do to contribute? And now you get into this rhythm and habit of making a difference in someone else's life. Maybe it's, I haven't spoken with my mom in a while. It's been a month. I'll give her a call. I'll impact her life and bring joy to her. Little things that create significant difference in people's lives. I think that's huge. So I want to touch and just give you that tool, that important question.
I love that. Like what you're doing with us today. I mean, that's just something that's so, simple in the big scheme of things, but the way you can have an impact on others just by making those decisions. That's really inspiring, man. Well, with all that, you guys, I'm really happy you guys got a chance to get a little out of Chris. We're going to hopefully have him back on and get a little bit more out of him in the future. He's got a lot to provide. And if anybody that wants to maybe dig a little deeper into their own purpose and kind of take action on some of the stuff that we've been talking about today, I'm going to leave all of Chris's contact info in the show notes. But in addition to that, Chris, how can everybody connect with you if they'd like to, have a chat with you and maybe can even consider working with you?
Super easy. You can write me at chris@peakstate.coach, chris@peakstate.coach. If you want more information, you can log into my website, peakstate.coach, and you have everything on there. You can schedule a call and happy to chat with whoever's interested and wants to know more.
Thanks, man. Well, you guys, hope you got some value out of this. I know I did. And we'll look forward to hopefully again having Chris back. And until next week, we'll see you guys on a brand new episode of the Pursuit of Progress podcast. Chris, thanks so much, man.
Thanks for having me, Adam. Till next time.